Yo, what's good, y'all? It's JD, and today I'm going to be running you guys through a park workout. And I also wanted to chop it up with you guys about a question that a subscriber or somebody in the comment section had asked me. And that question was, how many days per week should a 40-year-old calisthenics athlete or somebody who's 40 who does calisthenics train? So this is a very good question, and the answer to this question is going to be different depending on where you're at in your calisthenics journey. But before we get into the video, again, my name is JD. I'm a 40-year-old hybrid athlete. I use calisthenics, weightlifting, and running as my primary modalities of training. I'm also a personal trainer, so if you're interested in one-on-one coaching or program, go to my website, hybridathlete40.com. But let's get back into the video. So first off, let's talk about this first exercise that I'm doing on the bars here. And this is kind of a prep for my muscle up work. And I'm just doing some explosive pull-ups. And what I'm trying to do is get my waist to the bar on these explosive pull-ups. As you guys can see, doing like sets of 3 singles, and maybe on like the first rep or maybe even the second rep on some of these sets, I'm able to get my waist to the bar. The work's not necessarily pretty, but I'm really just working on this for explosiveness. Now let's get into how many days per week I train, and specifically calisthenics movements. As you guys know, I'm a hybrid athlete, so I don't only train calisthenics. Now, I do have 2 days per week where I do calisthenics only training, but then I have another strength training day, another resistance training day, where I mostly use all weighted movements. So this is where I get my lower body movements in. This is where I get my squats in. This is also where I get my heavy weighted isolation movements in, like preacher curls or barbell or dumbbell planche presses. My workouts tend to be extremely intense, and I try to get a lot of volume in during my workouts. So in order for my body to recover enough for me to build muscle and gain strength, I like to keep it at around 3 days per week of resistance training. Now, personally, I don't see 3 days of activity as enough. And for me, cardio is a big aspect of my training routine and my training program. So for me, I run at least 2 days per week, and most weeks I'm running 3 days per week. These runs can be anywhere from 3 miles all the way to 10 miles. If I had to average it out, I'd probably say I'm averaging around 14 to 17 miles per week of running. All right, guys, now we're into the second exercise of the day, and that is bar muscle ups. And essentially what I'm doing here is just trying to eliminate as much kip as possible out of my muscle ups. Rep ranges on these is not very high. I don't tend to do high volume muscle ups. I just try to get quality reps in. And here I'm starting off with a single. I go to 3 reps, then I go to 5 reps. Then I go back down to 3 reps, and then I go to 1 rep again. And you guys will see here with my last 2 sets, I do singles and I go with the slow false grip muscle up. One important thing to think about when it comes down to how many days per week that you're going to be training on your calisthenics journey is, number 1, what is your work capacity? And number 2, what is your recovery capacity? And your work capacity is essentially what level of calisthenics are you at? Can you do 4 sets of 10 pull-ups? Can you do 4 sets of 15 dips? Are you working on movements like handstand push-ups? Are you working on movements like muscle-ups? Are you working on the planche, front lever, so on and so forth? And you have to be honest with yourself about where you're at when it comes down to what your capacity is movements-wise, and then you also have to be honest with yourself about where your capacity is endurance-wise. And the endurance piece is more so how much volume can you get in? How many sets of, handstand push-ups can you do in a day? How many sets of muscle-ups can you do in a day? How many sets of dips can you do in a day without your body completely breaking down? Because at some point, if you don't have a super high capacity for, whatever your work rate is, you're going to get injured because you're going to be doing junk reps. So you don't want to go over your work capacity because, it's basically just diminishing returns, and it actually can hinder your training more so than it can help your training. I know a lot of calisthenics YouTubers, make content and they're just like, oh, this workout that I'm doing 500 reps, or I'm doing 1,000 dips. But you have to ask yourself, how many of those sets of dips or pull-ups or whatever exercise they're doing are quality reps? So my philosophy is always quality over quantity. But I will say the fundamental movements and the basic movements of calisthenics are a lot easier to recover from than once you start getting into some of the more advanced movement patterns like planche, or when you get into some of the more advanced movement patterns like, different variations of handstand push-ups. The more difficult movement patterns are going to put a lot more stress on your joints. They're going to put a lot more stress on your nervous system. Therefore, you're going to need more time to recover from these movements. With that being said, if you are somebody who's starting your journey, or if you're somebody who's on the beginner to intermediate level and you're doing a lot of reps and sets work, say for instance, you do 5 exercises per day. Let's just say the exercises are pull-ups, dips, push-ups, rows, and leg raises. You could essentially work out 5 to 6 times per week doing a routine similar to that, and be able to recover and just take one rest day per week. So essentially, the less intense your workout, the less intensity and the less taxing it is on your nervous system and on your joints, the more days per week that you can work out. And as you guys can see here, the next movement is a banded half lay planche. I would say out of every movement that I've trained on my calisthenics journey, the planche has been the most elusive, evasive, whatever you want to call it. It's the most difficult movement that I've ever trained, and it also puts a lot of stress on the body. So I've been up and down on my journey on the planche, and what I've noticed as a heavier calisthenics athlete, I'm 6 feet tall, 195 pounds, is that I have to deload off of the planche, because what ends up happening is I'll make a lot of progress and then my nervous system will just burn out, or, I just tax my body so much from training planche for maybe 2 months in a row, make a lot of progress, and then I'll get to a point where I hit a hard plateau, and I mean an extremely hard plateau. So incorporating something like deload weeks or a deload week is going to be something super important to add into your training program as well. And if you guys are just now getting started on your training journey, or if you've hit one of these plateaus and you'd like some help on your training journey, go to my website, hybridathlete40.com, and take the intake assessment. We can set up a consultation and we can figure out a good program for you, whether that's one of my already put together programs or one-on-one coaching. All right, so the next exercise for the day is strict ring muscle ups. And I was actually inspired to get these strict ring muscle ups in because one of my homeboys, Payday J, I'll leave the link in the description for his channel. You should definitely go check his channel out. The other day I was watching his YouTube video, and he was basically challenging himself to get as strict of a L-sit muscle up in as possible. And what he was saying by that was full range of motion, turn out at the bottom, turn out at the top. So you doing the ring turn out at the top, you extending full range of motion at the bottom of the movement, and getting as many reps in as possible. Now, I didn't necessarily max out today, but I did go with my 1 rep, 3 reps, 5 reps kind of system on this as well. And it was definitely some work. It's funny. Sometimes we can kind of use less than optimal form, not saying bad form, but we can use less than optimal form, and we can just accept that as the standard. But the dangerous thing about that is that, over time, if you don't watch out, that standard can keep on lowering, and keep on lowering. When it comes down to calisthenics, we want to keep raising our standards and keep on making our form as good as possible. Now, I'm not a calisthenics elitist. I know there's like a lot of calisthenics elitists out on YouTube or Instagram or whatever who really nitpick at everything people do. I have the mindset that everybody's, kind of doing this calisthenics thing at their own pace. So everybody's form isn't going to be the same. Everybody's not going to have the same range of motion, so on and so forth. As long as we're trying to progress and trying to increase our range of motion, trying to make our form as crispy as possible, that's, as good as we can get. Now, the next exercise that you guys see me doing here is 90-degree handstand push-ups. For those of you who are on your handstand push-up journey, for those of you who have already mastered the handstand push-up, I highly recommend training for the 90-degree handstand push-up. I would say this is probably the most complete handstand push-up variation out there. The amount of different muscle groups that you're engaging while you're doing this movement, it's really unmatched. Honestly, when I was at my peak physique-wise training calisthenics was when I was just spamming handstand push-ups, 90-degree handstand push-ups in particular. I would probably train 90-degree handstand push-ups every single day. So, that's just a testament to how effective it is, not only just for building strength, because it's a great strength builder and probably the movement that inspired me to start training planche to begin with, but also because it's just effective at building muscle. I mean, it's just plain and simple. I would probably say, as far as the push movements that I've mastered in calisthenics, it's the peak. So breaking it all down, to answer the question of how many days per week somebody who's in their 40s training calisthenics should train, I would probably break it down into 3 different categories. You have your beginner athlete, you have your intermediate athlete, and then you have your advanced athlete. So when it comes down to beginners, I would actually be a little bit more cautious when it comes down to training. I'd probably train calisthenics anywhere from 3 to 4 times per week, whatever you feel like your body can handle at the moment. You have to understand, as a beginner, a lot of these movements are new to you. So these movements, even though they might be fundamentals or they might be basics, the basics and the fundamentals are stressing your body, and the basics and the fundamentals are putting a lot of stress on your nervous system as well. Now, once you get to that intermediate level where you've pretty much mastered the basics and maybe you're working on a few advanced skills like muscle ups or handstand push-ups, you can kick the volume up. You can do more sets, you can do more reps, you can train more days per week. If you're in your 20s, you can pretty much train 7 days per week. If you're in your 30s, you can probably train, early 30s, you can probably get away with training 6 or 7 days per week as well. But once you get into your 40s, I'd probably say maybe a sweet spot would be like 5 days per week, maybe 6 days per week, and give yourself a rest period. But I would say the more advanced you get in calisthenics, the less volume that you can do, the less training that you can do, because you really need to be mindful of recovery. Like I said, I only train 3 days per week. Am I saying that you can't train more than 3 days per week? You can probably train 5 days per week, really. But you also need to keep in mind how your body's going to be feeling on a week by week basis. For me, I've went, periods of time where I've trained 5 days per week while training advanced calisthenics movements. I've trained periods of time where I've trained 4 days per week training advanced calisthenics movements. And now I've kind of consolidated it to 3 days per week. And this is the best my body's feeling. One thing that we really need to take into consideration as, 40 plus calisthenics athletes is we want our body to feel optimal on a day in and day out basis. If we're always walking around with a pinch in our shoulder or elbow pain, or, just super fatigued in general, it's going to affect our quality of life for the other areas of our life that we need to show up in. But anyways, guys, that's it for today's video. If you got some value from this video, like, comment, subscribe. If you guys are interested in learning more about my hybrid approach to training or need help on your training journey, go to my website, hybridathlete40.com, take the assessment.